This is Chattanooga Civics. I'm Nathan Bird. On Tuesday, March 2nd, the City of Chattanooga will hold elections for both City Council and Mayor. I recently had the pleasure of interviewing Mr. Tim Kelly, local businessman and candidate for City Mayor. I joined him at the Chattanooga Workshop, in the studio where he records his podcast, Common Purpose. I hope you find our conversation informative as you head to the polls in March. So I'm here with Tim Kelly, mayoral candidate for the city of Chattanooga, and I just want to jump right in. Tim, just introduce yourself, take a couple seconds. What's your history in Chattanooga and what made you get involved in local politics?
I'm Tim Kelly. I grew up here in Chattanooga, except for 4 years up in New York in college. I've been here my entire life, all 53 years of it, and I decided to get involved. I was never the guy that kind of ran for student council or was in any form of government, but it's a longer answer. But the short version is I really love Chattanooga, and I want to see it move forward. I'm afraid that it might not.
Right.
I mean, that's the short answer.
So what's kind of your overall vision for your campaign and for where you want to lead the city?
Well, I don't have any.
Elevator pitch.
Okay. So the elevator pitch is this. I mean, I don't have any future political ambition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go to Nashville. I don't want to go to D.C.
Right.
I think I have a really good resume for the job. I've run businesses here for the last 30 years, but I've also been very involved in the nonprofit community here for the last 30 years. So I've seen Chattanooga from a lot of different angles: private, public, philanthropic. And I know where the levers and buttons are, right? So I think I have a good resume for the job. I think I'm the best person for the job, and it is a job, right? It's an executive political position, particularly like a mayor is kind of the CEO of a company of 2,200 people, depending on whether you include fire and police. And so I've dedicated my life here. I'm not going anywhere, and I want to see it succeed and thrive. I heard actually a podcast with Andrew Yang where he said, as an entrepreneur, and I guess that's what I am really at heart, the thing that entrepreneurs hate is wasted potential. And it has totally lit me up because that is what I hate. I hate when things aren't running right or as well as they could. And my brain's always working on how would we optimize, and that's how I see Chattanooga, right? I see Chattanooga as an amazing wellspring of potential that's just not hitting on all cylinders currently.
So that's actually a great lead into our next question. What do you think Chattanooga's top strength or asset is, and how do we capitalize on it? And what are you going to do as mayor to capitalize on those assets?
I think our main strength, I mean, business guys, you talk about, in corporate strategy, they talk a lot about sustainable competitive advantage. What do you have that nobody else has and nobody else is likely to be able to get? And from a city perspective, that has to be our natural assets, right? So our rivers, our mountains, our trails, our streams. I think Bob Corker had a great idea years ago with Outdoor Chattanooga, with institutionalizing, creating a hub for those assets to market those assets, not just for the really kind of superficial touristy ways, but to attract the right sort of people to Chattanooga, to attract the right sort of companies to Chattanooga. And that is kind of just and to improve the health and wellness of Chattanoogans. There's 1,000 benefits, right? But it has definitely lacked focus and intention. I mean, Outdoor Chattanooga is still there, but I would elevate that to a cabinet level position and put a lot more focus and intention in Outdoor Chattanooga. So I think Chattanooga's outdoor assets are really its greatest strength. Second would be the arts community here is really great and vibrant and very authentic. It doesn't get a lot of focus and intention, but it is a significant differentiator, again, because we're so close to Nashville. A lot of times it gets overshadowed, but it's real. The other really non-obvious thing I'd say is that, I say this all the time, but Chattanooga's full of people, talented people, right, who could be in a larger market, making more money, or on some higher rung of a career ladder, right? But they're not. They're here. And I'm fascinated with the concept of self-selection. So the question is, why are they here?
Right. I mean, that's something that affects me personally. I came down from Nashville,
Yeah.
where I could have been making not a lot more money, but more money, and decided to come here. Family is one part of it, but also, like you said, outdoor resources has been a
Case
huge
in
part
point,
of,
right? And
of
so,
why I'm here.
so the answer again, a lot of times, kind of points back to you can just sort of say inductively that you are somebody, and there are a lot of us. I think I fall in that category. There are a lot of people here that fall in that category. We value something more than ourselves, right? Than like how much money can I make? You obviously put it all into some big calculator in your brain, and your family's part of that, and the quality of life's part of that. But so it's not anti-materialistic, but something else matters more. And so, kind of right beneath the surface, we all share that value. We never talk about it.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a very roundabout way of saying Chattanooga's people is in some ways its greatest asset, because we can do things as a community. This is kind of my backdoor realization. It's kind of been a kind of a shibboleth, sort of something that people talk about here for the last 30, 40 years. Like, well, Chattanooga can get things done. We've got this great history of bipartisanship, and, we get and we have got a track record of getting things done. But I think that's why.
Right.
If you go to a bigger city, a lot of times there's this air of anonymity, and people are kind of just too busy, and they don't give a and so, but that's not the case in Chattanooga, and I think that's why.
Right.
So the third thing would be just the people.
So circling back to the outdoors, there has been, I mean, obviously we've been named #1 city by Outdoor Magazine, I think twice now, and a couple other publications have picked up on that, and it's definitely something that Chattanooga is starting to capitalize on. But one thing that I hear a lot is that there are communities that feel like they don't have the same access.
Yep.
Historically, they have not taken advantage of the trails and the climbing and the river. I know I was listening to an interview with, I think it was Monty Brule, actually, and he was saying that, growing up, he doesn't even know if he saw the river until he was a teenager.
Yeah.
So what plans do you have as mayor to improve access to those disadvantaged communities that maybe historically haven't had that same kind of access?
Yeah, it's a very strange thing. I will just say, Monty's a friend, and when I was a kid, like there was the city generally wasn't paying attention to the river or our outdoor assets, but it was definitely more pronounced in low-income communities, and it still is the case. So I've got some pretty specific plans. I had Moise Baptiste on my podcast, and we were talking about this particularly, but Parks and Rec should be this connector to outdoor Chattanooga, and the connections exist now. It's just not a program that is functioning well. To get kids to use the Parks and Rec centers as feeders and have outdoor Chattanooga more aggressively, work with the heads of those Parks and Rec departments to get kids out on trails and out on paddle boards and out hiking and seeing those assets.
Right.
Transportation's a big issue there. But again, I think we can use CARTA. Monty's got some great ideas about this too, but I think we can use CARTA more effectively and innovatively, to accomplish a lot of that. There are a lot more equity issues tied up in transportation than you might suspect.
Right, definitely. Yeah. And that maybe leads into your next answer for this next question, maybe not. But what is Chattanooga's biggest weakness, and how can we fix it?
Man, the biggest weakness, that's maybe not weakness, but liability. One of the things that really got me thinking seriously about running for mayor was reading a book called The New Geography of Jobs by a guy named Enrico Moretti at Berkeley. And the thesis of that is that there's kind of a Mendoza line, like a breaking point between smaller cities and bigger cities. And bigger cities like Nashville and Atlanta are soaking up talent and capital at this ever-increasing pace because of the network effect, that larger companies can employ. And, post-COVID, I think we have an opportunity to really fight back against that. But the macroeconomics of it are still very much against us. If we're not careful, that's where I think Chattanooga is really on this kind of slippery slope, where if we're not very careful, we could just become sort of a wasteland of $12 an hour jobs and a little Gatlinburg down by the river. It's not dystopian future compared to what Chattanooga can and should be, right? So I think air service has been a traditional weakness in terms of in terms of economic development handicap. The other huge one is our educational system. It has woefully underperformed, but Chattanooga has never really had a high functioning public education system, and it has to have one if we're going to compete, economically, if we're going to turn out the sort of, citizens that we need to have a healthy functioning city.
As mayor, I mean, most of the education system is under the jurisdiction of the county and the school board and all of that. And so I'm just curious, what plans do you have that you can enact as mayor to improve our education system?
So I think
it's a huge question.
It is
People
a
have
huge
all
question.
the time. That's the number one reason people get involved in local politics.
And to be fair to the current administration and prior administrations, I mean, it's a simple enough thing I mean, look, it's like you say, it's right there in black and white. I mean, the county handles education funding. But at some point, I think the city has got to just kind of, very frankly, pound the table and use the mayor's office more as a bully pulpit to say, this isn't good enough, right? So I think it starts there, just saying, the city should reserve the right to go back in the school business if it absolutely has to, because it's just too important to the economic future of the city. It just is. I mean, it's the number one long-term, most important thing, most crucial thing that we can do to turn around and or cement our fate, for better or for worse. So in general, I would start there. More specifically, though, I would say the city can do a lot more, not a lot more, because Andy Burke's done a good job here of expanding early childhood education. So more seats for Head Start and more kind of wraparound services, particularly in low-income neighborhoods. I tell this story a lot on the campaign trail, but I went through business school late in life after GM's bankruptcy, and I considered it my own little GI Bill, and went down to Emory and got my MBA down there. And I had a professor who had a appointment in the medical school as a psychiatrist, but he also taught organizational management in the business school. And he gave this really, really compelling lecture about human development. I mean, this guy's not a hack. I mean, knows his stuff backwards and forwards. And his point was just that by the time a kid is 6 or 7 years old, bread's baked. I mean, you could have heard a pin drop when he finished the lecture, because the implications were really pretty scary. I mean, it's like, well, then what are we doing? With K through 12.
Right.
If all the actions in the early childhood, and he made a really compelling case that it is, then that's where all our focus should be. Right? So the city can do a lot about that, and that would really be my every extra dime I can find in the sofa cushions in the budget, for me, would go towards early childhood education, because I don't have future political ambitions. I don't care if it pays off in my term or my lifetime.
Right.
That is the one thing that will produce the most downstream benefit for Chattanooga, for sure. So that's a big one. And then lastly, again, I think we can use CARTA. There's some really innovative models with smaller buses and like Uber Pool. I mean, Dallas does this. They have a Dash program where they use smaller buses, and they literally use Uber Pool. And you have a fare bank, or credits, and then you just use those. And smaller buses run sort of regional routes, and that could be used to get students from low-income students. The Future Ready Institute concept is a great concept, but low-income students can't get to the Future Ready Institute of their choice currently. So, we would be looking to use CARTA to fill that gap, and help out with the school system. And lastly, I would just say I think Brent Goldberg, who's working on the campaign now, was my CFO at Honda, at my Honda store, was the chief business officer at the school system. And he believes that there are many other ways that the city and the school system can work more closely together.
Right.
Again, historically, it's been, well, that's not our business,
Hands off.
right? It's the county. But that is a false abdication. It's the city schools are in the city, and it's too important to the future of the city just to throw our hands up.
So you mentioned finding as much money in the budget as you can for early childhood, which leads us into just the budget more broadly.
Yeah.
How do you think your budget would differ from what's been done under the Burke administration, and not just during the allocation of funds, but would you make any changes to the community input process?
Let me start by saying the community input process has been great. That's something Andy started doing that was long overdue, that hadn't been done. I mean, I'm a big believer in listening, and being sort of from a retail world, you listen to your customers. In this case, the taxpayers are the customers. A lot of times filtering the signal and the noise can be difficult, but you got to listen, right? You got to just have that aperture and throw it wide open and actively solicit input, not just kind of say, fill in your comment card. So if anything, I would expand that. And kudos to the Burke administration for starting that, because I don't think anybody did it before.
Right.
That part, wholeheartedly agree with. I think the budgeting for outcomes process, while good, done with the best of intentions, has been has resulted in a little bit too much bureaucratic hoop jumping, and asking, nonprofits who provide critical services to the city. So the city doesn't have a rape crisis center, for example. The nonprofit that does that, the Partnership for Children, Families, and Adults, has to come back every year and sort of say, please, can we have the money to do this thing? I mean, we should have them on sort of 3 to 5 year budget cycles. We know they're there, check in, send in regular financials.
Stability.
Yeah. I think we can streamline the budget process quite a bit. And I think we would look at things through the lens, maybe not differently than what's done now, but we would look at budgeting for impact. Again, if you're paying city taxes, what are you getting for your taxes? And how is that felt by the taxpayer? Suburban taxpayers have different priorities than urban taxpayers, very clearly. There might be some interesting cost accounting ways that we can look at that, just to sort of understand budget impact and implication. Again, I've got a ton of experience with budget management, so that is a strength I bring to the table. So I think the short answer is we would truncate it. We would make it more compact and shorten up that budget cycle, and pursue it based on the strategic goals that align with our campaign platform.
Right. Moving on. So for better or worse, most of the authority, again, we've talked about this with the schools, but most of the authority over COVID response has been given over to the county as well. The county health department has pretty much complete control over the mask mandates, over business closures, all of that kind of thing. Hopefully by election time, we'll have a vaccine and this won't even be as big of an issue.
Right.
But there's going to be economic fallout from the pandemic, certainly. I mean, the business loans are starting to run out. Eviction moratoriums are starting to end. I mean, there's a big cliff coming up. And that's something that you as mayor would definitely have a little bit more control over. So what is your plan to help Chattanooga recover from more of the economic and personal impacts of COVID?
Well, I'm deeply disappointed in Congress, I'll say, because I mean, we all know that that we should have had another stimulus plan by now. It's just immoral, very frankly, that they haven't been able to pull that off. And I wouldn't blame one side more than the other, very frankly, but it's bad. It's bad. Just listening to the news coming in here, and they don't think that they'll get it done even early January. They're doubtful that they can do it after Biden's inauguration. And the implications are really, really, dire. So all I'll say is, hey, I've managed through, a couple of severe recessions before, both the one in the early 90s and, of course, the last 2006, 2007, 2010 recession. And, it's no fun, but I know how to do it. I would say our small business community, particularly entertainment and restaurant community, are going to need a lot of help. There's no substitute for dollars, right? And federal, the scale of aid that's needed will have to. The city just doesn't have that sort of money.
Right.
But the city can certainly help coordinate resources from the state and federal level, which, God willing, will be around by then. I think the other thing we can do is, I know a lot about entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial training. One of my platforms is to use that to really tune up our local entrepreneurial ecosystem. In many cases of these companies or these entrepreneurs will run out of cash and just have to close the doors. And, who knows what'll happen vis-a-vis their landlords. Right. Very frankly, I have much more sympathy for the business operator than I do for the landlord. One of the weird distortions of PPP was, one of the things you got paid back was your rent. Well, you got a landlord who just collects money from a mailbox, and I own a couple places. I'm a landlord, but I mean, the landlord arguably should be taking a little bit of a haircut too, right? I mean, they didn't, in theory, take any haircuts through this. It's a very bizarre kind of untold story about the aid that, again, God willing, the cavalry arrives. We don't really have to get too much deeper into that. But my focus would be on helping the entrepreneurs look at their business plans and reboot successfully.
Right.
Getting them connected to the financial resources, the banks, getting the pro formas together and getting restarted, because it's, too important to the ecosystem of our quality of life to just let those businesses fail.
Do you think there'd be any changes in like regulations, easing up restrictions on, I mean, outdoor dining is a big thing that's come up, and
So
things like that. Just,
I'm a very, our big campaign thing is common sense for common purpose. If you go back and look at the beginning of this pandemic, before, the really crazy months were June, July, there was a lot of, I don't think it's too strong to say hysteria, but if you back up to the early days, it was masks, social distance, outdoors and avoiding crowds. And we're right back where we started, right? I mean, that's what works. We know it works. You add the vaccine to that mix. And I mean, I personally would be all about, and there's some other cities that have done this, helping restaurants with loans or grants to expand outdoor dining, certainly make the permitting process a breeze from the city perspective, so that they can expand outdoor dining, because that's the no-brainer of all no-brainers. Again, that's not going to be much help in January and February, depending on how fast the vaccine rolls out. But I can tell you with what, I would address it with intention and urgency. I think that's the thing government generally has lacked, and arguably we've lacked here, very frankly. And that's one thing that business people tend to bring to the party.
Right. So moving on, there's been a lot of conversation both nationally and locally around policing. And there's a lot of different suggestions out there of how to improve our law enforcement system. They're all over the place, from defunding the police to divestment and reinvestment to implementing new training and accountability systems. And all of these are kind of existing at odds with one another. You can't do all of them. And so I'm wondering, what is your administration going to do to make sure all Chattanoogans feel safe and just make sure
I mean, this is arguably, this and homelessness are really the toughest things I've dealt with on the campaign trail. I've gotten to know Chief Roddy pretty well. I really like him. I don't think many Chattanoogans realize how progressive the Chattanooga Police Department is, particularly vis-a-vis their counterparts of the county, who, again, I think you saw the contrast as sharply as you'll ever see it during the riots around, I mean, we didn't really have what you would call riots per se.
Here was pretty normal.
But they conducted themselves well, and Chief Roddy really was sort of the glue that held the city together there for a little while. So I'm a fan, right? And I know there are voices in the community that disagree. I understand, right? But in talking to all people, I mean, you gotta, as you say, the job of a mayor, the job of any executive is to make decisions, and they can't always be popular decisions. But my role and my charge would be to work with Roddy, really, to help affect a lot of the reforms that were already underway before any of this started, right? I mean, there are some really sensible things we can do to let them do what they're hired to do, to let police be police, and to peel out the pieces that are either irrelevant or where somebody's better suited to respond, like mental health situations.
Right.
And, let social workers come in alongside them to help address those issues. I use the example a lot, too, of, Memphis has got a third-party private company that comes in and does crash traffic reporting. If we move that over and pay them, is that defunding the police? No, it's just rationalizing function, very frankly.
Taking a plate off.
Yeah.
Taking something off their plate so they can focus on, crime and
I also think,
things.
Money will never, a lot of this gets into the sort of the boring weeds of finance, but those cameras, if you've ever been to London, they're everywhere, and they really do help solve crimes. We've got a fair number around Chattanooga, and they've been helping. If you talk to the police there, They're fans of that. They're about 15 grand a piece. Again, that's capital budget that can be amortized. I think that would be helpful, because a lot of times a lot of these crime issues in the neighborhoods are ones where they can't find a witness to testify, or
Right.
things of that nature.
Right.
So there are some creative ways that we can do this that aren't punitive, for the police force, who, after all, are out there 95, if not 99%, of which are there for the right reasons, doing their best job every day, and the interests of the communities that have traditionally been oppressed, who also have completely understandable logical beefs because of the historical injustice that they've endured. Right? You can reconcile those things. You can do it. I think you just have to listen to both sides and find solutions that meet both tests.
Right. So moving on again a little bit, Chattanooga government still has a reputation as a good old boys club, and more decisions being made in the country club than in the city council chambers.
Exactly.
And so I'm just wondering what your administration might do to make sure that all Chattanoogans feel represented, and not just nominally. Community input processes are great, but make sure that people actually feel like their voice is making a difference.
Yeah. No, listen, I should say this too. Despite the way that I look, or some people's perception of me, I did not come from like old Lookout Mountain money. That ain't me. I belong to a country club, as for business entertainment, because I was in the car business forever. But I think I played, 10 rounds of golf in 10 years maybe. It's just, there's no time for it. I'm not that guy, right? And I highly believe in transparency and accountability, and I completely share that. I think a lot of the problems we've had with political disengagement is the sense that people have, they've just sort of given up, like, why bother?
Right.
The single most effective thing I think we can do to address the problem that you're addressing is city council used to have, I can't remember what they called the person, but it was essentially like, sort of a budget analyst, almost like, the CBO does at the federal level. And that person would look at any bill or any proposed legislation coming through city council and give a report based on, what's the budget impact, what's the fiscal impact, what's the, and to the extent that they're reporting out to the council, they're reporting out to the public. Right? I mean, I'm a big believer that the truth will set you free, and I very frankly do not agree with the way city council is conducted now, where it's all just kind of going through the motions, and clearly they've all decided what's going to happen before they come out there and bang the gavel.
Right.
It may be political theater, but it's important, right, for the mayor to show up to those things occasionally. British Parliament's always kind of entertaining to watch, right? But,
yes.
But they're having the conversation.
Very much so.
And I think that's a good thing, right? That's how we arrive at the right answer, the dialectic. You have the conversation, and you understand both sides of the argument, and you hopefully arrive at the right answer.
Right.
And even if it's, it's not sunshine laws notwithstanding, it's fine to have had conversations ahead of time about it, but it's important for the public to feel like that it is being done. Right. That it actually is done in the light of day in the open air. So that putting in that budget analyst position, I think, will help a lot, because that would help a tremendous amount. Secondly, I would just say Chattanooga, when it's run best, back in probably the, I don't know, no point in debating the era, but we had more of this kind of spirit of living room conversation, right? The political leaders went on talk radio more often. They did interviews. They did, it wasn't sort of, here's a press release.
Right.
And that, I'm the same guy, right? This has not been rehearsed. I mean, and so I think we just need to make ourselves more available,
right,
and talk about the issues, and right, and again, that, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of disagreement about it, but that's how we arrive at the right answer.
Right.
One of the things that whoever wins this mayoral race, one of the things that I hope comes out of it is that for the first time in a while, we will be having this healthy dialogue about what the issues are and what we should do about them. And I think that should continue into the next administration.
Right. You mentioned previous leaders joining in on talk radio shows and local news and things like that. I think part of what's changed is also just the media landscape has shifted. I know I don't know anybody who listens to radio anymore, personally. Like my age group, none of us listen to radio. Yeah. And I mean, that's part of the reason I started this podcast is because that's where the people are. Yep. That's where people are trying to get their news. And I feel like the administrations and, different community leaders, some of them are starting to catch up, but it's still kind of that gray zone where people don't really know where to get this information out.
I think part of it too, I think that's an excellent point, right? I mean, there are certain people, there's an age, break where older people probably listen to talk radio more often, younger people listen to podcasts. We do both, right. But it's an excellent point. And I can't remember where I was going with it. But
do you think you would continue? I know you have Common Purpose as part of your campaign, your podcast. Do you think you would continue anything like that?
For sure.
As mayor?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, well, the thing I like about talk radio is that it's more spontaneous. Not that these can't be, right? I mean, I would do both, but I mean, I would, whatever it looked like. Well, let me say two things. One, I do think this is, I think it's not because I'm a better person. I think, very frankly, it's because I don't have any future political ambitions, right? If you're worried about how something might look on a postcard, or what if I run for governor, or what if I'm running for, I'm not doing any of that stuff. I'm not, I mean, I guess I can never say never, but I'm never going to act as though, I'm never.
It's not in the cards right now.
The fact of the matter is I'm not doing it. I mean, I'm not, my wife would kill me. I have no interest in doing it. I only care about Chattanooga. I really don't. I couldn't go to Nashville and pretend like I give a rat's ass about Nashville or Knoxville. I don't. Sorry, Nashville, Knoxville, I don't. Right? So I'm just not going to do it. So there, I said it. But because of that, I think you can be more open in conversation about what's best for the city and not be as particularly as cautious. So that's that. But yes, I would definitely continue. The other thing I was going to say is that I do think the city could do a better job of and Los Angeles does a really good job of this, if you're doing municipal research, of really good broad brush public communications, right? Public communications about communicating a city's priorities and values is not a 6-paragraph email.
Right.
It's not, right? I mean, there are more effective ways to communicate that sort of thing, and I think we could do a better job of that, and that would be part of it.
Great. The next topic I want to cover is development, land use, that kind of thing. This is a really broad topic, and it's going to be hard to dial it down because some people are worried about overdevelopment and that we're not placing enough restrictions on developers, that water quality control and traffic generation and that kind of thing are a big issue in some people's minds. And then other people are worried that there's not enough affordable housing and that there's not enough development downtown. I mean, personally, there's tons of empty lots downtown, and it drives me crazy every time I drive by them. So people are all over the place on this issue, and it's not something you're going to be able to make everybody happy on. But what are you going to do in your administration to guide and hopefully improve development in the city?
There's not an easy answer. I would say the most non-obvious thing that I would ask people to think about is, and I bet you most people haven't thought about this, you might not have thought about it, but it correlates in many, many ways to school quality. A lot of the problems we've got with developmental clustering, where things are getting, one neighborhood's getting hot and people start complaining about gentrification and unaffordability, there are places around what people think are good schools, right? If we can broadly raise the quality of the school system across the city and the county, that spreads out the development pressure, right? So again, back to education. Beyond that, look, I mean, I've read a lot of analysis on the local real estate market and the development, sort of ecosystem here, and there is a ton of opportunity relative to other markets. Chattanooga's still underbought, generally speaking, and it is a Goldilocks problem. That this is where getting it exactly right with good management and good policy is super important. And again, on the balance right now, most places we need more development and thoughtful development. But at the same time, I think one of our big 5 platforms is neighborhood development. And one big deal is putting in things like neighborhood trusts, supporting those concepts to buffer the kind of runaway train development that leads to gentrification and forces people out.
Right.
So increasing home ownership.
Go into those trusts a little bit more, because I'm not sure everybody might be familiar with
well,
those.
if you Google it, there's some around the country that are doing well now. Essentially, think of it as a neighborhood association on steroids, where they might be able to get, or they would get grants from either private or public foundations or from the city to buy properties,
Right.
in the neighborhoods, sit on them, and then the trustees would decide, hey, we'll sell that to this person, but not to this out-of-town slumlord.
Right. Gives neighborhoods a little bit more control over who they're selling to, how it gets developed.
Precisely. That's it in a nutshell.
And I cut you off. I'm not
No,
sure
that's it, really. I mean, that's it. And there's some good examples of where it's working well around the country. I'm a big believer in a community capital. I mean, we did that through, we were one of the first, I guess, the first soccer team in the U.S. to do a crowdfunded equity raise through CFC. And crowdfunded equity and community capital in general it should have already gotten more traction, because the whole idea was to sort of put Main Street on an equal footing with Wall Street, in the vernacular, but ways in which we can use local private and public foundations in the city and the county, and maybe even pension funds, to directly invest in the right sort of projects here to buffer and direct development. Is a really great concept, right? That you hear this in the philanthropic world referred to as impact investing a lot. So there are a lot of strategies we can employ that we're not currently employing, both to encourage the right sort of investment and to, again, make sure that if again, the hell of it is if everything happens that we want to happen, and hey, we get going and we've attracted all these new jobs and this new company's moving in, and suddenly we're dealing with traffic, and
right.
So
Nashville is a great example of that. So it's part of why we left.
You have to do
exploded, and they didn't know what to do.
You have to do both. It's not an either or thing. I will say this: Chattanooga's got, believe it or not, Chattanooga has one of the dead level worst longitudinal growth rates of any city within 500 miles a year. Relative to, our 5-year growth rate in the last study that the Chamber of Commerce did was 10 basis points. That is 0.1% behind Knoxville's. And that surprises most people, because they're like, Knoxville sucks, I mean, Chattanooga's got it going on. No. Chattanooga's still largely a poor town, it's crushingly poor for a whole segment of population in that River to Ridge neighborhood. And so we need more economic growth. We absolutely do. But at the same time, that does not mean that we just throw the doors open to all comers and just,
Give it
let
away.
it run. And that's where I get back to, it's management.
Right.
That's what I would bring to the table. It's intentional and careful management of the civic infrastructure.
So a big part of this in my mind, and you just mentioned it with that last word, infrastructure, is, and we've already talked about transportation in terms of CARTA and more vehicular transportation, things like that. But a big part in my mind of neighborhood development and, gentrification and all this is non-automotive infrastructure.
Yeah, totally.
I'm just wondering where you stand on that, because this is another one of those Goldilocks problems. There are people who absolutely cannot stand all of the bike lanes going up right now, and there are people who love them. And I'm just wondering where you stand, and if we're going to see more of those or less of those.
Well, this is going to sound like a cop out. I'm a car dealer. I'm a car dealer on the one hand. I'm also a motorcycle dealer, and I have scooter lines. And actually, we have Segway now, which is a really exciting electric. I mean, I'll say this: we are on the cusp of the electric revolution that's been near. And it's. Some people have sort of looked at it's kind of a dud. It's kind of a false start. It's not. We're just really to the point where, in terms of cost and reliability, it's becoming commercially viable. I mean, I've got a little Segway scooter now. It's $770. It'll go 40 miles on a charge. It'll go 25 miles an hour. I mean, all of a sudden it's like, wow. Like I live in Fort Wood. I could commute all through downtown and,
never get in a car.
Never get in the car.
Yep.
And so I think we actually have an opportunity. I applaud, in theory, a lot of the stuff that the current administration has done in theory has been fantastic. I think the issue a lot of times has been execution. And the bike lanes in theory are great. I've got I bike and, from my house all the time. They could be more cohesive. They could be more coordinated.
Right.
And again, a lot of times I think they've been just dismissive of traditional vehicular traffic, and there's no reason for that. You look at, for example, Bailey Avenue and Macaulay Avenue. Bailey is largely residential. Macaulay is largely commercial. They run parallel to each other. No reason on earth one shouldn't be largely dedicated to alternate vehicle traffic, and one shouldn't be, not completely, but largely dedicated to vehicular traffic, right? So there are best practices around the country we can follow in this regard. This is not a wheel that we have to reinvent. I do think this is a really good opportunity on the cusp of this, of it really taking off, to take a deep breath, not completely start over, but start over and reimagine how it works better for everybody, for both alternate vehicles and for automobiles.
Right. Yeah. I could go on forever on this. Development and infrastructure is my personal, that's the thing I spend most of my time reading about.
How about wastewater? That's a good one.
I'm doing an episode on wastewater eventually, so it's going to
get
you
covered.
Should,
but let me just say this: like one of the biggest no-brainers, which has been kicked around like a political football right now, and people avoid it like it's toxic or nuclear, and I don't know why. Is we have one stormwater sewer system right now that's connected, and yet from an administrative perspective, you've got a county system and a city system. If they were combined, they could bond a lot cheaper. They could borrow money a lot cheaper. We'd save a lot of money on administrative overhead. There's no practical reason on earth, absent working out details, that shouldn't happen. But that's one of those things that I would, really try to push. That would really be in the long-term best interests of Chattanooga.
Great.
Yeah.
So I have one last question.
Yep.
And this is super open-ended, but what do you think is the most achievable change that your administration can make in Chattanooga? In other words, what is an idea that, regardless of any political pressures or anything else that might be bearing down upon your administration, what is something you have 100% confidence you can and will implement?
Synchronizing traffic lights. I get this. I a lot of times think I'm getting punked. I've spent some time out in Wyoming. I'm not a beach person, so if I go out of town and kick back, it's Lander, Wyoming usually. And Lander, really simple. I mean, there are other cities where there's a big sign up that says, traffic lights are set for 25 miles per hour, which is 5 miles per hour below the speed limit. What a concept.
Right.
You're not speeding.
You go 25,
you don't have to tap the brakes.
Green lights the whole
it's
way.
More ecological.
Yeah.
I mean, why not, for crying out loud? Traffic engineering here drives me bananas. And there's just no reason for it. So, so that's an easy one. On the weekends when there's no traffic downtown, blinking yellow and blinking red does not make you Mayberry. It's okay, right? So there's some really commonsensical things we can do around that. There's some really easy things we can do to allow locals to park more easily and cheaply downtown. I think one of the problems we've got is that the parking market has been distorted by it has been distorted, but the tourist market who are willing to come in and pay, you basically pay the same thing to park in downtown Chattanooga that you pay in downtown Nashville.
Right. And
that's kind of crazy, right? Because it's based on the tourist market. So what it's meant is that locals have avoided downtown. Right. Our license plates are all in the system already. Right. Through the city sticker that we have. So that database is there. Park Mobile, if you've used that app, uses the license plate. So look, I think there are ways that I would be looking, maybe not day one, but month one, to make it so that locals get to park downtown at least an hour free. It's not just cost, it's friction, but making it easier for local people to park downtown and patronize local businesses downtown. That's another easy one.
Great. Well, that's all I have. I want to thank you for joining me here.
Thank you, man.
I'm glad for letting us use this studio. This is great.
Listen, you're more than welcome. Like I said, when I heard your intro for the concept of the podcast, it, like my hair lit a fire, and I was like, God, somebody else gets it. So I'm just so glad you're doing it, and I just share your passion to wake people up to the idea that local matters more. It's not just that it also matters, it matters more. If we could get people focused on local politics, then worry about Nashville, then worry about DC, we'd all be a lot saner and happier.
Right.
Thank you, man.
Thank you. If you want to learn more about the Kelly campaign, you can visit his website, kellyforcha.com, or listen to his podcast, Common Purpose. You can find links to these resources in the show notes. This has been Chattanooga Civics. Our music was written and recorded by Kevin MacLeod. If you're enjoying this podcast, please share it with your friends. If you have any questions or feedback, send me an email at chattanoogacivics@gmail.com or follow me on Facebook or Twitter @chatcivics. If you're feeling especially generous, you can donate to support this podcast using the link in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.